Okay, in this video, we're going to talk to you about how to insert a figure and how to make sure that you caption it well. And also, it's going to be important that we reference where the figure came from if it is not something that we created. Okay, so what we've got here is if I want to insert a figure, I can use the code begin figure, right? So how does that look? Right, so I can say begin figure, right? And it's going to create most everything that I need. Right, the one thing is that um, you'll want to add this HTTP with the exclamation mark code that it basically is going to be telling the LaTeX compiler to make the best selection for where your information fits, right? And so let's say I come over here um, and set this up and say, okay, hey, I'm going to want to have, right, this first figure and then the second figure be this kappa curve procedure, right? I want to make sure I include my graphics, and so I imported my items into images, and so I might say I want to talk about the common entry types for Bibtex, right? And I might want to come over here and say, hey, um, Bibtex entry types, right? And if I didn't create it, I'm going to want to indicate the source, right? And so this source might happens to be from the University of Illinois, um, which is written by A.J. Hildebrand, and the year was in 2011 for this particular one, right? So this happens to be the author. I may not know who the author was. It might just come from a particular university. And so I might say University of Illinois math faculty, right? That the particular image that I get that I'm going to import, right, is going to be an image of this information right here, which happens to come from the faculty of the University of Illinois. All right, so I might come over here and say, okay, there I have it. And then label is going to be how I label my information. So I happen to know that Hildebrand is the uh, author for that particular website. And I might say Hildebrand Bibtex so I have an easier time identifying my information. Okay, so if I come and I recompile, it's going to give me my images, right, from my first one first, and it says, hey, Bibtex entry types and the source, right, and then my second image second, okay. Now, I may want to adjust the size of my image. I may want to adjust the size of my image. And in order to do that, I can come and put some brackets and say, I want the width to be a specified width. So I might say the width of this needs to be 4 inches. And if I come and I do, so now I've adjusted the width to 4 inches. I might adjust, say, hey, no, I want this to be based on a height. So I might say I want the height to be 4 inches. So I'll adjust that and it'll come through and it'll make my height 4 inches. Maybe that's too big and I want it to be 2 inches in height. I can adjust that and I come and I have now 2 inches in height. Now, if we can't really read it well, we know that that is not a very good size, okay? I can also come in and set up my width, right, based on a fraction of my line width. And that's going to stretch me horizontally as much as I need and keep everything within the scale, right, of my line. And I might say, hey, I just want the width to be the entire line width. And there I have it. So it stretches out to be the entire line width. But if don't want to adjust the size of my image, I don't need to include that. and it'll simply input it based on the image size that I happen to have captured. Okay. And here we have University of Illinois, right? And if I don't want to attribute it to the math faculty specifically, because I don't know it's from the math faculty, there I have, right, and I can talk about my figure. Okay. If I look down here, right, for this one, I have my source set up to a second line, and the way I'd set up the source to a second line is with this double backslash. So I might come over and do the same thing, right, double backslash, and you'll notice that that changes, right, where my source is, but it doesn't seem to have changed it within this one. So let me double check, why is that the case? I need to figure this out just a moment. Let's play around with this. Let's say that I wanted the height to be 3 inches. See if giving me a little bit more space underneath will allow me to adjust. And it doesn't seem to have adjusted that, but it does seem to have moved my references ahead of the image down here. So I'll need to figure out why my caption isn't creating a new line um, as it should. Let's try forcing a new line this way. So if I do that, yeah, it's not letting me to create a new line on there, and it really should. It might be just because it's a, oh, I know why. Because it doesn't know to go on to a new line. But if I do this, University of Illinois um, math faculty, if I do it this way, add a little bit, that should get me to the second line. Yeah, so it'll only give you a second line if it would take 2 lines to create your piece. But notice that for this one, this image is now in between my references. And that's simply because what the LaTeX did was say, hey, I've got space at the bottom that I could fill with my references. So it automatically goes to fill in that space, right? If the height that I had been changed to 4 inches, what'll happen, you'll notice, is that now there's no space at the bottom. So now the references go after my image, because when we talked about my images, it said, hey, put the image in the best location where it has space that'll fit. But then LaTeX also says, and text is going to go where that text fits. Now, I may want to change the order of my images. Literally, all I have to do is change the order of my images within my file. And now, instead of being figure 2, this capture procedure figure is now figure 1. But notice now, because there's space at the bottom of this page, the references is taking up the space at the bottom of the first page. And the second image, the Bibtex entry types, that's on the second page. Okay? If I don't want that to happen, which you don't want your references to come before things that don't need to be there, then you need to adjust your packages. You need to add this package called float. So once I add the package called float, and I want to force my image to be in a specific location, I can use the capital H. And it's basically saying, force your image to be here, right, in this location after the code that I have. So I have the first figure, and now the next space is going to be my figure 2. I'm going to force it to be there, and then I'm going to have my references at the end, right? If I were to have come over here, Control X, right, and said, hey, I want this figure to be specifically, I want this figure to be up here specifically before how to insert a figure. Well, I can do that. And now what I'm going to have is it's going to say, hey, I'm going to force this figure to go into this space before how to insert a figure. Okay. If I do not include that and I recompile, where my information goes is gonna be simply where it seems to fit, right? And so for this one, it says, you know what? It'll fit nicely at the top of the page. So it's put the information at the top of the page. If I come in and I use the right HTTP with an exclamation point, LaTeX is going to say, well, where do I want it to go? Well, it's going to say, oh, well, it'll fit well in that spot. Right? It'll fit well in this spot where you have it, and that'll be okay. But if you want to say, I must have it in this particular location, you're going to want to use capital H to indicate this must go in this particular location. That's where it has to be. Right? And if I want it to have to, oops, if I want it to have to be somewhere else, I simply need to move my figure. I say, hey, I want it to be forced to be after how to insert a figure. And now it is forced to be after how to insert a figure. So once again, you forget that, LaTeX is just going to say, oh, I'll put it where I want. It fits there. It fits at the front. You may not want it there, right? If you say HT, right, PB with the exclamation point, right, it's telling LaTeX, hey, kind of find the best place for it. It says, okay, best place for it based on where you have it is going to be in that location. They say, oh, okay. But once again, what will happen is if LaTeX sees space that it can use and you haven't told it explicitly not to use that space, you might have one section come before a figure that you don't want to have happen. And the way you control that, use the capital H with the float package. Right, so then there I have with the capital constant, and now my references come afterwards. Okay. In the next videos, we'll show you some additional items you can do with the LaTeX.